Hi, I'm Kendra with the Anacostia Watershed Society. I'm here today to share with you some of my favorite animals of the Anacostia Watershed. To do that, we're going to be animal detectives, using animal evidence that I've gathered from around the watershed and clues that we'll gather together today.
Come on aboard!
Hey, check it out. It looks like we found a track. Let's see what we can discover from this clue. So the first thing that I notice is we have 1, 2, 3, 4 toe pads. And the first thing that comes to mind for me is that canines and felines are animals that typically have 4 toe pads. So there's a few more things that we can check out to decide if this may be a canine or a feline. The first is, you can see here, there seem to be nail marks. Felines will not leave nail marks, and that's because they're able to retract their claws back into their paw. So because there's nail marks, I'm starting to believe that this could be a canine or a dog species. I also noticed that it's relatively small, so if it's a canine, it must be a small canine that lives in this area. There's one more thing that we can do to check, and that is, I'm going to use this stick in my hand, and we are going to see if we can draw a straight X through the paw print. If we can draw a straight X and the lines don't end up being wiggly, then it is likely a canine species. If they are wiggly, likely a feline species. So let's see what we have here. All right, it turned out pretty straight, so I'm definitely starting to believe that this may be a canine species. And we have 2 canine species in this area. We have the red fox and we have the coyote. So let's head over to the evidence table and see if we can match it up with a few other clues to decide what kind of wild dog this is. All right, so welcome to our evidence table. We're going to use a few more clues to try and figure out what animals were out in the wild this morning. So we have 2 prints. We have this print here and this print. So we have to decide which one looks more like the track that we saw out in the wild. Both of them definitely appear to be canine tracks. But one, the toe pads are a little bit further spread apart and looks more like the one that we saw outside in the wild. I would say this guy. So let's go ahead and open up the box and see what clue is inside. Okay. So here we have a skull. And there are a few things that we can look at on an animal skull to better understand what that animal eats, how it behaves, and where it might like to live. So the first thing that we can look at on a skull are the teeth. So here we see that we have our incisors, which are present both at the bottom and top of the jaw. We have pointy canines at the corners of the top and bottom jaw. And then eventually we work our way back to the flat molars, which are near the back of this jaw. So we could assume that this animal probably eats some meat, but we also have these flat molars in the back. And flat molars are typically used for eating more vegetative material because it needs to be ground down in order to be digested. So possibly we have an omnivore on our hands. 2 more things to point out. On this skull, this area right here is called the zygomatic arch. There's one on both sides of the skull. And then this little bump that we see at the top here is called the sagittal crest. Whenever there is a tall sagittal crest or a wide zygomatic arch, that means that there had to be a lot of muscle attachment. And that muscle attachment was likely used for powerful chewing, so this animal probably needed to chew some difficult food. And one final thing to point out is where the eyes are on the skull. So one way you can check where an eye would be on a skull is to just take your fingers and insert them straight into the eye sockets of the skull. So you can see right here, I'm putting my fingers straight in. And because my fingers are able to point directly in towards the skull, I know that the eyes were likely front facing. So front-facing eyes are usually a sign of a predator. All right, so let's take a look at one more clue. So what I have here is a pelt, and this pelt might give our animal away right away for you. So we have this beautiful red coat, and on this animal, they have a bit of white at the end of the tail as well. Very furry. We have nice guard hairs, and then there are also some wool hairs underneath, which are for extra warmth. What do you guys think? I think I figured it out. I think we have a red fox here. Well, it looks like we have some more tracks here all the way out in the wetlands. So this track is a little bit different than the others that we've seen. Instead of digits, this animal has hooves. There's also some scat here. It's very pebble-like. I wonder if the animal came all the way out here just for a drink of water. Let's head over to the animal evidence table for a few more clues. Now it's time to match the track that we just saw out in the field with the track here at our evidence table. You might be able to pick it out right away. The one that looks different from all the rest without any individual toe digits. That's right, this guy, our only hoof. So it looks like our first clue is a skull. And the first thing that we like to do when we look at skulls is check out the teeth. All of these teeth are flat molars. We don't have any of those pointy canines that we saw before, which is a sign that this animal was likely a herbivore. We also have bottom incisors here in the front, but we don't have any top incisors. So possibly this animal spent a lot of time reaching and grabbing plants from below. All right, let's take a look at our next piece of evidence. We have a pelt, a very large pelt, and you may notice that this pelt has a very nice dark and light brown color, which makes me think that this animal might have wanted to camouflage itself in wooded areas or forests. And as you work your way down the pelt and get to the tail, you'll notice that the tail has a bright white coloration to it, which could have been used to warn other animals of its kind of danger approaching. So we have our final piece of evidence, which I think is going to give it away automatically. We have an antler. So the only animal that lives in the watershed with antlers are white-tailed deer. So we have a white-tailed deer here in the Anacostia Watershed that we have seen this morning. Oh, here are some tracks. I see webbing, and I also see some nail marks in these tracks. Let's see if there are any more clues. Oh, here's some scat. An animal was here recently. Oh, okay, wow. It looks like we have a big mound of sticks and then somewhat of an opening underneath. I can show you one of the sticks up close. It looks like it's been chewed to almost a perfect point. Interesting clue. Well, let's head over to our animal evidence table and see if we can figure out what animal was here today. All right, let's find our track. So now we're looking for a track that has signs of webbing in between the toes. So if we look down our line, I'm automatically drawn to this box here. Let's see what we have. All right, so here's our next skull. This skull, right away you're probably noticing the huge incisors at the front of the mouth. So this animal definitely did a lot of chewing or chomping with these big front incisors. If we look in further, we have many flat molars. And if we remember right, molars are responsible for grinding things like plant material. Now, if we look at the top of the skull, we should try and understand the eye placement here. So we're going to do what we did before and try and put our fingers in to understand where the eyes were. Here, when I insert my fingers, They're pointing almost down towards the bottom of the skull, which makes me believe that the eyes of this animal were on the top of the head. Usually a sign of an animal that spends a lot of time in the water. All right, now let's take a look at this piece of evidence. Here's our pelt. It's very soft. And right away I noticed that we have two types of fur. We have these nice shiny guard hairs on the top, and underneath very soft, warm wool hairs. So guard hairs like this are also usually a sign of an animal that spends time in the water because they have the power to wick water off of the fur. And then our final piece of evidence, if you haven't guessed it already, I have this chewed on stick. So if you can think of any animal that has huge front incisors and loves to gnaw on wood, you may have thought of a beaver. So what we have today is the American beaver.
Thanks for joining me as an animal detective today. Now get outside and see what animal signs you can find.